To order the November 20th workshop meeting of the Oshkosh Common Council. This is yet another budget meeting. This is our 6th or 7th. I'm not sure. The council meeting is our 7th, I think.
We'll
so
get it right pretty
it's
soon.
really our 7th meeting. This is more than we've had before, but we did want to have more information about this. So this is what we're doing. I'm going to ask the clerk to take the roll call vote because eventually we're going to go into closed session. We want to start the roll call vote now. So,
Okay, Clark,
Present.
Fitzgerald,
Here.
Cummings,
here,
Allison Ospey. Here. Heck,
Here.
Condon,
Here.
Tower,
here.
present 7.
Okay, kind of where we are. We've had a number of workshops. The focus tonight, before we get out of here, is providing some direction, some idea to the city manager about maybe possible scenarios that might come up with respect to the budget amendments next week. In essence, the city manager is responsible for coming up with a budget, a balanced budget, and submitting it to council, which is what he has done. In essence, next week, that is the budget that will come to us for approval. And we can make any amendments we want to make to it, because ultimately the budget is our responsibility. And the idea is tonight to give them some idea about some of the types of amendments that might be made. In order to do that, we may need to ask some more questions or do whatever. So what I thought we'd do is this. I've asked the city manager, since it's basically his budget he presents to us, just give us a little bit of intro in terms of why his budget looks like it does, for whatever reasons. There are a number of things in there. We'll see what his rationale is. I think that's important for us to understand. Then basically we can start asking any questions, and towards the end, whenever that end might come, in an hour or hour and a half or 2 hours, I think if people have some idea of possible amendments that they may want to make next week, I think we suggest those to the city manager that those might come up. That does not limit the amendments that can be made next week. There may be things that happen between now and next week, discussions, input, more amendments can be made. But what we have to do is really pass a budget next week. That's really kind of our obligation to pass it next week. That has to be done so the bills can be prepared and get out, and so the taxpayers can get those people who want to pay their taxes this year and expect to pay their taxes this year, to put it on their tax returns and so on, will have their bills in time to get that done. So it's a tight timeline. So next Tuesday, I don't know whether we'll discuss the budget for a half an hour or 2 hours, but when we get through, we're going to have to pass some sort of a budget. His budget plus whatever amendments that we tend as a council to add to that. Is that any questions on that? Is that reasonable? Is that fairly clear?
Great.
Okay. I also should say that there's really no citizen input or anything like that tonight. Citizens did have an opportunity to make inputs at the last council meeting. They will have an opportunity next week. Prior to us, after we announce the budget, we'll be up for approval. Citizens will have the opportunity to make comments. There are a number of department heads here if people have questions, but it may be that we may not have questions of them, maybe of the city manager, of each other. We will not be taking any votes tonight. That's got to be clear, too. This is not, we want this changed in the budget, so how many people are for this, or what's the consensus? This is not a business meeting. We can't take those kinds of action, really. So we're not going to change the budget tonight. Okay, I'll ask Mr. Roloff to briefly make a presentation in terms of why you've done basically what you've done with the budget that you've given us.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I get started, just some light housekeeping work. These are the 2 rate increase proposals that were done by the consultant John Meyer regarding water and sewer rates. These are just to take home. These are for next week's meeting, but I thought it would be appropriate to give them to you in advance so you've got them. So I didn't want to forget them at the end of the meeting and have you leave without them. The mayor had asked me to talk a little bit about some of the thought process that went into some of my recommendations, because my recommendations were out there, but and then we got into department discussions, but we never really got into the general thought process, not really the specific process, but what went into my mind as we did this. And I had some really good discussions with department heads over the last few weeks, usually after the workshops, any observations they held, as well as preparing for the public presentation that was on OCMS. And I've made some other public presentations with people asking about the budget. And it kind of solidified some of these things. And one of the things that I think has guided me is the citizen survey that we do with UW Oshkosh. This was actually begun back in 2009 as it was originally called a budget priority survey. It has since evolved away from that, but I think it still does have value in terms of council taking a look at what priorities are there for the city. And there's two basic areas that the survey takes a look at. The first thing it does is it asks residents to rate services in terms of importance. And so this slide shows you what the very important services that the public identified. Now, sometimes this is a little skewed by the time of the year. I will tell you and remind you that this survey is done in March and reported to us in April. So sometimes winter can have a little impact, or the lack of spring because people aren't thinking about Pollock Community Water Park. But those are inherent in any type of survey that you take. But it's interesting to show that in terms of importance of services, these were 6 of the largest, the ones that got the most in terms of very important. So this was the top of the scale. And even with only one, it was a scale of 1 to 5. This is the number 5. So you can see that 83% of residents said fire protection was a very important service. Now, I'm not saying important and very important. It was clear out very important. So it shows you very clearly what high importance residents put on these services. This is not an issue of quality. This is merely what's important to them. And clearly, police and fire are very high up there. And then public works. And usually I'll say police, fire, public works. It's sort of my mantra. That's because those are the basic services that we provide. And I think the council's discussion over these work sessions has been consistent with that. Those basic services that's what's very important. But the survey goes to another level, and it also asks the residents, tell us how you rate these services in terms of how good they are, how well we deliver the services. And that's the other one. Now, this doesn't do the bar chart because the bar chart wouldn't work as well, but you can see these are some of the services that we gleaned out of there. And you can see that something like the public library and police, fire protection and prevention, those 3 are some of the highest rated services in the city. Now, you'll notice that police and fire are highly rated in terms of importance as well as quality. Very proud of what we have in the public. High importance, high quality, that's really good. But what you need to take a look at here is what are the services that are important but are also rated low in terms of quality. And I also took a look at the council's strategic plan and said, what is important to council? I think I took a fairly reasonable jump to say that if it was in your strategic plan as a priority goal, then it's obviously important to you. And so neighborhood revitalization is in there. And this is where I took the top 2 and the bottom 2 in terms of the scale. But you can see that neighborhood revitalization, 64% of our residents think our neighborhood revitalization efforts are fair to poor quality. And that's a very telling sign. Similarly, down the list, of course, snow and ice removal. The fact that we're getting 45% of fair or poor and 55% excellent and good in March, actually I get somewhat relieved by that because even at the end of the winter, there's still a reasonably positive reflection on our service. So, and you'll notice that 55 and 45, there's pretty even. Street repair, storm drainage systems, fair to poor quality, and that's even before it starts to drain. So the street conditions and the storm drain conditions, even in the dead of winter, are very much on people's minds. They haven't forgotten about the floods of 04 or 08 or 10 or 12. They remember them very well. So as I looked at this data, trying to come up with recommendations, these areas that are rated low on this sheet, and I really focused on the ones that were rated low because they are rated low, but they also have a high level of importance to the residents. So here's your dilemma, and this is where you get thrown into this very difficult box. Do you cut services that the public rates as important but not good quality? So in other words, do you lower the quality of something that they would want the quality improved, or do you go after something that is very highly rated and highly important and sacrifice that a little bit for the sake of the other services that we provide? That's really the dilemma we have. In the final analysis, I had to do a little of both because I made cuts to public safety, and I also made cuts to neighborhood revitalization by virtue of the assistant planner, and on down the list. But those were the ones that were the hardest ones to make because of where they were in terms of the importance as well as the quality of service. And as I've made this similar presentation, it seems to have get people to understand it. I don't think it necessarily gets you to your conclusion easier, and I don't think I helped lobby you one way or the other because that wasn't the purpose of it, but it was to identify what's important to our residents and what are we doing well. And there kind of lays out the thought process that I went through. And I also took a look at 10 years of reductions we've made. We've made significant reductions in public works over the last 10 years. Some of it is due to very good reasons. We cut in garbage and recycling because we got more efficient, and we're very proud of that. That was absolutely the right thing to do. It was more than just a budget move. It was an efficiency move that we did, and we're very proud of the results that we've had with both automation of those programs. So we've been able to improve those when the public said, those are really important services, we made them more efficient. They still think they're important, and they still rate them pretty good. So we did well to cut from that budget, yet not reduce the quality. The challenge here, though, is you will see a reduction in quality of service, and I think that's been well laid out by the department heads, by virtue of our wonderful studio audience. I mean, everybody's here. They recognize the importance of their service, and the public agrees with them. So the challenge is, what do you do with this? But I wanted to share the data with you. I know we've talked about it before, but that's sort of the thought process I went through. Mayor, is that kind of what you were, that's...
Up to you. I just wanted you to get you really hadn't talked about why you did what you did. You presented it, and I thought it's important for us to understand why you did what you did.
Okay, so that's pretty much it. I appreciate you listening.
Okay, what I might do is throw out now what kinds of questions do people have, or what direction do you want to go? It's up to the folks here. Are there questions on some of the data you have that not as clear as you would like?
Are we starting with the operating budget or the CIP?
We can go, let's do the operating budget first, or let's go there first. Good question.
Are we starting with things that we would like to see changed, or are we just going to start with kind of a general discussion?
Let's start with questions and clarifications. If there are things, or there may be something you want to have changed, but you think you might want to have it changed, but maybe you've gotten some information you aren't sure. Could you might say, what would be the consequence of doing this? So you really aren't ready to make that. I can ask a couple just trying to do it. We have lots of numbers, and when you go through all these numbers, when trying to go through these things, it's not easy, and sometimes you can't always reconcile things easily. Quick question for you is, what is the amount of money involved in the across-the-board non-rep? One time we got something that said, I think that's worth $270,000, and then on the most recent sheet you sent us this week, you talked about $341,000. That's a fairly significant difference, and I was sort of, why are those being defined differently at this point in time? Because I do have some thoughts down the line about compensation, but before I can indicate my concerns about compensation, I need to understand the compensation, and I don't understand that difference, because on the one sheet you showed us 270, on this sheet you showed us 341.
Sure.
Why? Is 1% worth a
think we
certain
can-
amount of money, or is it worth another amount of money?
I think we can reconcile that. I think it was the data set we used, but Sue Brinkman's here, and I think she can answer that question. Why don't you go sit next to the mayor? It is now.
Make it hot.
It is now.
What a joy.
All right, let me see if I can
Here
refresh
is
my
the
memory.
341 figure I'm talking about. 270 was on the sheet that you had proposed before that we had when you said if we wanted to eliminate that or whatever, it'd be 270. So, and supposedly it's 2.5%. It can't equal two numbers that are
So what we-
$70,000 apart.
Sure. So what we did here is we took a look at the 2013, the amount that was budgeted, and then the 2014, the amount that was proposed, and that difference is 341, 393.
Reason being for that is the 1% that the council awarded was not, that was part of the pay performance that we switched over to 1%. That was not budgeted in the individual departments. It was budgeted in a separate account.
I think it was unclassified.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
classified
so-
in a different place.
Okay, so this is the difference figure. The other, so the 270 is what it would cost us.
That's the
Approximately-
270.
It's approximately a little over $100,000 per 1%.
Correct. And that's probably when you're talking about it, it's about 100,000 per 1%, and I think that's the number you can use for purposes of discussion.
Okay. Last year, following up on the compensation thing, because that's where I have a number of questions, we allocated basically $200,000 for pay for performance. How was that distributed?
$50,000 was for wage compression issues, primarily in public safety, management, and supervisory areas. So the first $50,000 was done there. And then,
So that really wasn't pay for performance.
no, but we knew that we needed those funds,
No,
and so,
I
yeah.
understand it, but here we talk about pay for performance being reduced by 50,000.
Correct.
Because it's 150, and that was 200 last year, but we're saying right now that pay for performance really only was 150,000 last year. 50,000 of that pay for performance went to adjustments.
Correct. We were just trying to reconcile the budget as opposed to do anything.
I understand, but I'm trying to, it has to do with some things that I have in mind later. I just
Sure.
And how was that distributed pay for performance last year?
That was the 1%. We didn't do the paper performance. Remember, the council didn't approve it until May, so in lieu of that, we did the 1%.
So it was 1% for all non-reps,
Correct.
correct? Correct. Okay. Okay, another question I have on that information you gave us that I just need a little help with is labor cost as a percentage of total budget. On the first page, there's a classification called unclassified. What was unclassified? That's still almost short of $1 million, so it's a fairly significant amount of money.
That's it. Right on there. I can read your handwriting.
Unclassified included the paper performance. That was where that 200,000 was budgeted. And so we cut that by 50,000. That's the bulk of what's in unclassified. If
Well,
you
that's
wanna-
only a piece of it. You show it as 887,000 last year, and that's only 200,000. So there's another almost
That's our
700,000.
non-collectible accounts and all that other stuff.
Yeah, there's other changes there. If you want to take a look at page,
Do you have the preliminary?
what page is unclassified at? Do you remember?
30.
Page 30. Thank you, Ed. Page 30 shows that the budget for adjustment of salaries was 200,000 in 2013, and it's now 150,000 for 2014. And I believe that unemployment compensation is also considered a personnel expense. for purposes of this? Is that, do you know, Sue, if you counted that? That's why there's a little difference in the personnel portion of it. But most of it's the $50,000.
You have 475,000 in uncollectible accounts.
Right. Most of it's the uncollectibles.
I'm just trying to figure out how that fits into the personnel budget.
All we did was identify the 21.18, those are the total budgets, that's not personnel. What we did was we showed you the total budget, and I
Okay.
believe the question was, what percentage of that total is labor?
Okay, so the
That's what that analysis
okay, so the
shows.
27% is, there's little labor in that, so that's the reason it's
Right,
so
that's a
little.
really low one.
So you're saying 81.70% is labor cost?
Yes. When you take a look at that, because when you take a look at the components, it's not intended to mathematically total there. But for example, and this is the point I've been raising with public safety, you take a look at police, 95.28% of their budget is personnel. Fire, 95.29% of their budget's personnel. And I think that was what the mayor was trying to point out. So when you get some of those departments that are so heavily personnel, even community development is over 80% personnel. You have some departments that are a little less. General government is a little less because there's a lot of overhead contracts that we have there. So that's only 2/3 personnel. But when you take all of the departments together in the general fund departments, it's 81%. Then there are other departments and other programs like Go Transit that's slightly under 50%, and that's primarily because we contract for paratransit. And then other funds supported by the general fund, Sue also did that analysis to show that 75% is supported by the general fund. So when you boil it all together, we're just under 74% of our operating budget is personnel related, labor related, direct and indirect labor costs. And I think that was your point, Mr. Mayor. And then also, we did a comparison from 2013 to 2014. And even with proposed reduction of 10 employees, the percentage of labor costs the labor costs as a percentage of the whole budget still go up, even with being down 10 employees from one to the next. So that really shows you that personnel costs and their increases are really a huge part of your budget. And I think Mr. Mayor, that was your point all along. Your concern was that when you have to make cuts, we're inevitably going to have to have a discussion about labor. And it's not just in police and fire, even though that's, just so much more a proportion of labor. It's really every department.
Okay, other questions?
One related to labor and the indirect labor is fringe benefits. Now, this is the time of year that many organizations are doing their open enrollments where they are, companies are coming forward with their health plans and setting what the next year's rates and everything will be. And, I know this is going to cause a lot of indigestion, but, I've gotten comments and some feedback that in the private sector, where, we're currently at 12% is the max that we are having our employees make is 12% of their health insurance, of the health insurance premium, they pay 12%, correct?
Correct.
I'm getting contacts where people are talking 20, 23, 25, and higher percentage. This is not even to do with ACA or anything like that. This is the portion of their health care costs that is being passed on to them by their employer. And I understand that that's money out of their pocket, out of our employees' pockets, but if we change this, but how do we address this? I mean, and then we further have the issue of where we say we have the representatives that can negotiate these costs, and we have the unrepresentatives that, in essence, we can, pass on, pass on increases. But the question that these people are asking me is, how can you justify the difference in this percentage that we're being charged at our employers based on what the city is charging?
I think we spent a lot of our efforts with the employees trying to get them to work with us to identify ways in which we can save money on the overall cost. And if we can save money on the overall cost, that's really, especially when we're picking up as the employer such a high percentage, every dollar we save in health insurance, the city is saving 88 cents of that dollar, and the employees are saving 12 cents of that dollar. And that's a good thing for us when savings accrue. When costs go up, as they have this year, that's where we really take the hit. Much of what we're experiencing now is experiential, having to do with just a couple bad years. We're still working with employees to identify ways to go down. I've seen a lot of good discussions happening with employees as a result of that. And we have employees that are represented, both with represented employees in the unions and outside the unions, to help us do that. We're going through a rough couple years here. We hope that we're past it. There's some indicators that say that that's where we might be going, but it's hard to say. Our goal has been to try to get our costs down, which will save everybody money in the long run.
But still, there's the question that
Well, one of the big
the other
difference.
people,
But
the other, that all the other people that live in this community that are at, is it's not like everybody, but it is a question that's being raised, is the percentage, not necessarily just the total cost, because I'm sure that all organizations have similar total cost structures. The question is the percentages of what is being, and of being paid by our employees as opposed to, because we often talk about market. And when we look at market, that's also, that is the market, what's going on out in all the other organizations in this area. And if we're going to bring wages to market, which we're doing, I think we also need to begin then addressing the benefits to market, and that includes the contributions.
Well, I think you make a good point, Councilmember Beck, and I think, as does City Manager Roloff, we certainly just don't want to cost shift and push the costs back and forth across the table. We want to look at it comprehensively, as City Manager Roloff talked about. But in addition to that, you brought up the idea of total compensation and the benefits along with the wages, and there may be some differences depending upon how we look at our plan versus other plans, even in the private sector. One thing right off the top of my head that I can, share to your point, many communities have dental plans, vision plans. We don't have that in the city of Oshkosh. That's not an offered benefit. In the private sector, it's pretty commonplace to provide those benefits as a part of the fringe benefit package. That's something that's not available to City of Oshkosh employees at this time.
In most cases, if those benefits are offered, there's a cost share as well on that.
There is a cost share, but right now that's not an offered benefit, nor is there and as a result, there's no cost share. So there's a variety of different things we can also look at, in regard to the plan structure, the deductibles, the co-pays, the out-of-pocket maxes, all that sort of stuff. I understand what you're saying, and I think that's a discussion we certainly have all the time at the bargaining table, and it's something that I think, as City Manager Roloff talked about, the employees understand that if we can't get benefits under control and work on it collectively as a team, then there's less money to put forward for all those other issues, as you mentioned. And that includes raises and compensation on all those issues. So they understand, and I think, Mayor Tower does a good job of bringing this point up that it's not an infinitely sized pie. There's a finite amount of money to go around, and how we choose to spend that money is really the question. And it behooves everyone to work on it, and I think you make a good point, and we certainly have to continue to work.
But do we have a plan for where we'd like to be within 5 years as a percentage mix?
For the premium share, Councilmember
Do we want
Cummings?
to go, are we looking at 12% now? Do we want to be at 24% in 5 years or 18%? What's the long range over the next 5 years plan?
Well, one of the things that we also look at as we talk about in the context of the collective bargaining process is where our comparables are. And we did that analysis this last time and took a look at where our comps are. I would say that our deductibles are low in comparison to our comparables. In terms of our premium share, I don't think we're too far off. I think that there was a focus, and I'm just talking about the public sector now, there was a focus and a priority put on municipalities to gather the employee contribution to WRS in the last several years. That was kind of the focus and the direction for a lot of municipalities, and that's where they concentrated their efforts to focus on that initiative. And when you're involved in that collective bargaining process, if you're in a takeaway mode, oftentimes there's a quid pro quo for that. So in a downturned economy where there's not a lot of money that's available to exchange for those takeaways, it's very difficult to take away more than one thing, for example, like WRS and then health insurance and a variety of other issues. So that's always part of the strategy. So to answer your question, do we have a target where we can go? We don't have a target, but we also take a look very carefully at the marketplace and what we can successfully achieve based on that.
So we do this on a year-by-year basis. We don't have a long-term goal of where we'd like to be.
We look out for the duration of the contract and see how far those contracts and the duration is, not only for ourselves but also our comparables, to see how far out they've gone and what they have been able to gather. Sometimes we've been leaders in that process. Other times we've lagged in that process. A lot of communities, as a strategy, let other people do the heavy lifting, and then they use those comparables to just follow on the coattails of those communities.
What we do is, from a financial standpoint, is we project out in terms of making assumptions on what our costs are going to be. And I think we did that when we were talking about implementing the pay study that we did with Charlie Carlson. We had shown council, look, if we don't exercise some control on these things, here's what could happen to our personnel costs. So we do more on a dollar basis rather than the benefit basis, and that's typically where we have the projection. And we know that we've got to curb that rate of increase, because that's really what's clobbering us.
I had a discussion earlier about switching to a high deductible health insurance, but we're past the timeline for this budget that would have to be done in a later time.
Right, and that's something that we want to take a look at in 2014. We want to get our group back together and take a look at that. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that I believe it was in 2011, employees were paying 7% premium share. So within the last couple of years, that percentage has increased to now 12%.
And I understand that you're faced with some immediate decisions as it relates to the budget. But to Sue's point, I got here in about 1999, and we've been in a mode where we've been working on the health insurance issue from that point forward until now. And no offense to the people that were here before I got here, but that was before health care costs started to escalate. And at that point in time, we had a health plan that was a $250, $500 deductible with no networks, no cost savings. You could go anywhere in the world, and the city would pay for everything after $250 if you were a single person, or $500 as a family. We introduced networks. We introduced individual exclusive provider organization. We've taken a look at co-pays. We've tried to put a variety of different controls on it to see how we could work on it. And I have to say the employees have been very receptive to trying to work with us to try to progress from where we were to where we are now. And do we need to do more? I think we will have to do more, and I think the employees understand that. But we're only going to realize that if we work on it together. I think, forcing it one way or the other, as I said, pushing the costs across the table, I don't think that's the most successful strategy.
Let me ask a related question. Now, under collective bargaining, clearly you bargain the percentages and the caps and things like that. You still have to bargain the plans?
The only thing we have to
We didn't have to anyway.
bargain is the percentage rate.
It's the percentage rate, so whether or not we go to high deductibles or low deductibles, that's not on
That's
this changes, I understand, we aren't sure where it is. I'm just trying to understand where we have potentially some discretion, where it's much more difficult to have discretion, or where there's some trade-off costs. Because there are alternative ways of bringing down the costs. One is having them share a greater part. The other is having them share a greater part through the deductibles, which is not a negotiable item.
I would agree with Mark. One caveat I would say is the laws have not changed for the individuals who are represented by the transit union. All those rules that were in place prior to Acts 10 and 32 are still in place.
That's 28.
For that group. It's relatively small. But we have the ability to change plan design if necessary for all the other employees. But that doesn't mean that we can unilaterally change the premium share, for example, as Councilmember Peck brought up earlier.
I think it's pretty clear that there's little we can do about it this year, but as we go to the future and next year, I think the council's probably going to be pushing you to look at more alternatives out there and getting a clearer idea of what the options are and where the discretion is, where it isn't, and where the cost would be. Other questions on this or thoughts?
I do have one question, Mayor Teller. We've identified, economic development is very critical to the future of the city. We looked at the different attributes that the citizens looked at, police protection, fire protection, and so forth. As far as economic development, when a company decides to either stay here, expand here, or come here, there's kind of four things that drive their decision. Financial aid from the community, the workforce, obviously land, and really fourth is the one that really tips the scale in most cases is quality of life. And quality of life means a lot of things to a lot of different people. As we look at the budget and the changes that may happen personnel-wise, which of these would have the most damaging impact on economic development?
Is that a question for me, or is that a rhetorical question for the council?
As a citizen / council member, I would have to say public safety. If you can't come into a community and feel that you can live here, work here, and play here, and be safe and secure, then you wouldn't come here. I think a lot of people come to a community based on crime stats, fire protection, ambulance protection, schools obviously are very important. We have the luxury of having a university, a technical college right in our backyard. So I think all of those play into economic development. I mean, if a company is going to relocate here, they would look at all of those types of situations, I would think. As a business owner, I'm not a business owner, Sean is, but I mean, when you relocate a business, I think you look at all those factors. What is the crime rate in your community? What is, what educational opportunities do you have? What is your school district rating? What is the leisure side of things? What is recreational opportunities? We have a lot of that with the water here, obviously, and a golf course and some of those other things. So I think those all play into that. So I think it's all a piece of the pie, what you're saying for economic. Could we tip the scales one way or the other? I don't think so, because then it's going to affect the overall approach to what our community should be. And just, I just want to make a comment on the benefits side for public employees. Traditionally, public employees have always, the benefit package was the incentive. You look at the number of employees we have just in police and fire, and I know transit's built into that, but there ain't one firefighter, there ain't one police officer that doesn't go to work that may not come home tomorrow. Transit, they drive the streets every day. They could get in a bad accident. We haven't had a public works employee killed, but the highway department did. They're out on the streets every day. They could get killed. Most of these employees put their life on the line every day they go to work, and compensation has been their benefit to kind of do that. Not everybody wants to be a public employee. The growth factor of salaries aren't the same as in the private sector. You don't have the opportunities because you're bound by contracts, you're bound by other things that affect their pay rates and things like that. So the benefit package has always been that incentive to get people into government service, not just police, fire, transit, but all government service. It's always been the benefit package that is the driving factor. And you can go back
security.
And security, job security, obviously, because we need those things. We need public works employees, we need police officers, we need firefighters, we need people in working in the offices, we need a clerk of courts, we need a city attorney, we need those things. Those are services that we provide to our citizens to make a community. And so how do you get them to come into this environment? Benefit package is part of it. Can we close the gaps and make them pay more? Yeah, we probably will have to work on that because the cost, as we just got it right here, city manager had it. And it's, way up there. 81.7% of our budget is tied up in salaries and fringes. So, but at the same time, the survey shows that what do the citizens expect out of their city and out of their council?
I think they'd expect that from any city.
Yeah, wherever you go. But you go up and
I'm
down.
getting the more subtle things that
Yeah.
add to the quality of
Sure.
life. And are we risking those very subtle things that could have effect on economic development?
Sure, we possibly could be cutting a position on economic development that we need for neighborhood revitalization. That showed up in the survey that we're lower on in that area.
That'll come up before the end of the night.
That was the point I was going to make, is in following up on Mr. Cummings' question about economic development. One of the things in the graph that was shown up there is that our neighborhood revitalization efforts, which, and part of this assistant planner that's being cut, is very important in delivering that neighborhood revitalization project. And economic development is your seed corn. Part of, we not only have to look at the expense side, but we also have to look at the revenue side. And if we don't maintain our housing stock, if we don't make this community a place that I think that really, when you look at police and fire, there's differences between communities, but that's always, that's basically a given. But then you get to these other aspects of what makes your city grow, and economic development falls under, it covers many different things, but basically that's your seed corn. That's how we are able to expand the tax base, which allows us to raise revenues, which allows us to continue to deliver services, which maybe won't force us to change our pay structure and things like that, and to cut something that is that was shown as important to the community, and the community feels that we're not delivering what they expect us to do for that. I think that's something we need to take a look at as part of this discussion.
Let me add one thing to that. As a realtor, when I take people around to show them different homes, I will avoid certain streets and certain neighborhoods. Because I don't want to have to explain why. So I'm between a profession as a realtor and a member of the council supporting and promoting the city, that I have to kind of sidestep some of these neighborhoods. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to continue doing that. And by license law, there are certain things questions we can't answer. But I think we've got momentum now in neighborhood revitalization. We're forming different associations. I think if we eliminate that position, we're going to step back 3 years. Again, the housing stock, the better condition it's in, the higher the assessed value. We're protecting the equity of our citizens, and we're also protecting the equity of the city. which has a big impact when it comes time to borrow money. So I think we just can't step backwards.
One of the things we have to remember is that, when you look at when you look at our employees, I mean, there's, I think, Mr. Fitzpatrick, you and I talked several weeks ago that in our public safety employees, about 50% of the people live outside of the community. Now, they made a decision to live outside the community for some reason. There are people that come to Oshkosh that don't necessarily work in Oshkosh, but they make a decision to live here because of something that we have. And when we get someone to choose Oshkosh, that keeps our property values up. We, granted, somebody can work in Neenah, but they want to live here. And so we need to make sure that we have this economic development, that we continue this neighborhood revitalization, that we have a strong housing stock, that we have, we don't have control over the schools. But the things that we can control and we can manage, when we can make that decision to say, when we help that decision to drive it to Oshkosh, that benefits us all.
Okay, other questions at this point?
I'm
Yeah.
curious if I can get some.
Go right ahead.
clarity.
Hop on.
I'm going to bring up the fire department issue here, but I know throughout our discussions there's been some uncertainty as to if there was going to be some retirements and how many retirements there was going to be. Is there any greater? And I guess ultimately I'm wondering, I don't know. I don't know if the chief's here tonight, possibly.
The chief's hiding right in the front row.
I mean, I'm curious kind of how long it takes to onboard a new firefighter when when a position becomes open, the hiring process that you go through. I mean, ultimately, what I'm looking at is there going to be some savings that are assumed at least during those periods where one firefighter has retired or one leaves and you're looking to bring another one on?
The actual recruitment process we started already in August of this year. By the time when we advertised, do the different first steps of the process. So pending the outcome of where we go with this, we would continue with, right now the process is on hold for the next few steps of it. Putting everything in place, it would probably be March 1st when we would be ready to replace the folks that we have right now. And to clarify the numbers again, we have 3 vacancies at the moment, and we have 2 folks that are retiring at the end of the year, we believe. 1 for sure, 1 most likely.
And just to add to Chief Franz's point about the hiring of folks, and I don't know if this is where you're going with this, Councilmember Fitzgerald, but as a result of the collective bargaining agreement that we worked on with the firefighters this last time, one of the things that was changed, and I know the council members approved that, was we restructured the steps for those positions, for those classifications. We had talked about the idea of what we had done for the other non-represented employees, and we shared that information with the leadership of their union, and they understood that it was important to try to look at things comprehensively and consider that proposal in the context of their collective bargaining agreement too, and that's one thing that they agreed to do. And when those positions are hired, we'll realize the savings over time.
Because they're at a lower pay scale too.
That was going to be my next question. Then obviously the individuals that are retiring are probably higher on the pay scale. The data that we've been given, the numbers that we're given, as far
These
as
are
what
assuming
it could
entry-level
cost,
people.
it would assume entry-level
And it
people.
also assumes, that pay also assumes that they wouldn't be starting until March 1st. Those savings are already calculated in.
Oh, it is, okay.
That being said, they start March 1st, but when are they really actually ready to be a firefighter? I mean, in a sense, they got the education, obviously, but for your standards, when are they, not counting their probation, but is it 6 months on the job before they're really
10
ready?
weeks. They would go through their 8-week recruit class, and then 2 weeks of, we call it riding third, being the third person on an ambulance for 5 shifts before we actually put them out into filling a specific position.
in this case with 5 positions, would you traditionally hire all 5 pretty much at the same time?
Yes, and that works best for recruit training, for them to have partners to carry out their different skills and to work with. It's just more efficient that way. That's why we try to hold off some of the hirings so that we can cluster them together for that recruit training period. And just to add, you might say, what takes so long for this hiring process, even up to this point through all the testing? The next steps that we would carry out during that period of time are 2 different interviews, a background investigation, a psychological exam, and a physical exam. So we have some outside agencies that we have to contract and coordinate those.
And then these 5 new hirees, of course, are spread throughout the city at different fire stations?
Yes.
Yeah, because they're the low man on the totem pole, so they get scattered.
Wherever there's, they fill
whatever's left.
So they don't get the luxury
Newbies
positions
get
like the
there.
airport.
No, they work everywhere.
This is a question either for, I guess for Fitz. When we look at, maybe I missed this, when we look at the personnel costs, the head count, if you will, are we looking at that person or that position for 12 months in the budgeting process? So you're saying some of these people will only be with us, start in March, so we're looking at 9 months. Now, how does that calculate into the budget? Are we?
When we do that budgeting process, those sorts of things are built in. Like, for example, in Tim's budget, when he budgeted for those folks, he assumed that they were going to be hired coming in at that certain time period. Even smaller issues like, for example, when one person moves from one step to the other, that takes place on the anniversary date of that person's hire. So even that little small element is built into the budget too, so as to not overinflate the budget, make it bigger than it really should be. So
It's a pretty accurate.
we try to be as
Correct.
precise as
Number. Yep.
The other thing
The other thing you got to keep in mind is that when you hire somebody, that affects all future budgets. You've changed the budget structurally, so while you're looking at next year's budget, you don't want to inflate it, but you've already inflated the budget for the following year.
That's if that.
Because you will have the person to full-time. So the savings that you get are short-term. Now, you're always going to have some savings that are short-term, but the reality is that when you hire someone halfway through the year, you get them full-time into the next budget period. So,
And I would say,
But only-
Mayor Tower is correct. The only thing I would say, though, in addition to that is, based on the structure of us having people move forward in their pay range, when we aren't always successful, but when we can rehire people at a lower pay rate, then we recover some salary savings at that point. We also recover some salary savings when we have vacancies that take place. So hopefully that is something that can account for that structural deficit, I think, that Mayor Tower's talking about.
Well, actually, that would apply if you're adding new employees over and above. If your current org chart has 100 employees and you have one person leave, and then it takes you we've got someone leaving and it takes us 3 months to fill that position. We've been paying for that position all along at a higher rate. If we went to 101 people, refilled that empty one and added another one, then yes, you have increased your labor cost. But if you maintain the same number on your org chart, you are going to, there's that minimal savings as you go there. When you look at it, you're really not you're not increasing your labor costs. There's an incremental change the following year because of that lag in the hiring. It's only if you would add to the body count, so to speak, then you have to account for that at that point. So
it goes to Mr. Carlson's note to you, which
Right.
didn't have anything to do with the fire department, but the same principle applies. There is a one-time bump that takes the employee, the higher paid employee it leaves the organization, a lower paid employee comes in, and then they slowly inch their way back to market control point, the top of this range, whatever you choose to call it, depending on the circumstances. And then the other thing that also has to be factored in, particularly in terms of Chief Franz's department, is he has the heavy rescue unit staffed right now, even though we're down 5 people, or we're only down 3 people. We still have it staffed, so that's done through overtime. And so Chief Franz has built that into his budget as well, because he knows that he'll have he has those positions that he needs to fill until a unit gets cut or doesn't get cut. And if it doesn't get cut and he begins the recruitment process, he knows that he's still going to need to fill those 3 to 5 slots in his shift, daily shift area until such time as the new recruits come aboard and are trained and are ready to go.
Essentially, the monies that were budgeted for those 3 vacancies for their regular pay and benefits is being used in overtime cost right now.
Until such time, yeah.
Okay, other questions? Yeah.
No, I think, I think the challenge that we face every year is, especially when you're talking about this particular area, Chief Franz's area, is really, this is broken down into 2 things, and there's the emotional and there's the intellectual. The emotional side, I think we all struggle with at times because we are in a unique position. We all have our challenges and our emotional thought process when we have some of our employees that have the benefit of collective bargaining and those employees that we have that do not. So that's almost a separate issue. How that shakes out at the end of the day, we don't have control of. What we do have control of is, do we say, we obviously have staffing needs for the sake of community. And I really don't think it's a long discussion. It's just whether or not we're going to meet the needs of the community. I think it's as simple as that. Then we have to figure out how to work it into the budget.
May add not only the needs next year, but in the future, too. I think anything we've got to think long-term. And the decisions we make today or next Tuesday, it's a long-term decision.
Well, and I think that, and we've talked about that in previous meetings, special events and all these. I mean, it's all encompassing. So, I absolutely agree 100% with you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. Okay, any other questions on the operating budget? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, the CIP. Allison Osby, I assume you want to talk about the CIP.
I don't know that it's anything specific. I think it's more of a philosophical discussion that we probably need to have based on the last Moody's report that we have. Obviously it identified, we did okay this time. What does it mean for future borrowing, future years? A lot has to go back to we've talked about operational budget. Part of the operational budget is the monies that go towards paying the interest payments and the principal payments on what we borrow, and we've continued to, for the money that we pay off, we then reborrow that same amount. And I think, I'm not saying we have to cut the CIP by $1 million or $2 million, but are we going to continue to stay this course? Because one of the things that we got hammered on, and it was mentioned 3 times in the last report, was we have no plan. And when you look at it, it's easy to look at and say, oh, well, we paid off $12 million, we're borrowing $12 million. However, when you look at the overall number that we're in debt, we're headed towards $200 million of debt that the city is carrying. So, we can't eat the elephant, but can we take a portion? And I think that's what we have to decide. Are we going to maintain the same, or are we going to take a look at it and say, we're at least going to make some good faith gesture to say we're going to scale back. And to be honest, there's no bad project in the CIP budget. There's not one. They're all valid. They're all good. But I guess I'd like to know what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are, I thought this year we basically decided we talked about this as a council, that we would authorize them basically to go to what got paid off we would do and stay at the same percentage as last year. But I think one thing we have to do is we're going to be talking about kind of goals for the city, goals for the city managers. I think we need a plan that says within 2 or 3 years we're going to be here. We need a plan and not do it at budget time, but it needs to be worked out earlier in the year, because you're exactly right. Given one, we've been saying it for a long time, 70% is where we want to be, or below 70%. But we haven't done is sat down and say, what's our long-run kind of strategy to do it? We can't do it in one budget period. So I'm saying I very much agree with you, and I think that needs to be a focal point. I mean, it's smacking us in the face, as you pointed out. I don't know about what we can do this year's budget unless people have specific suggestions to do with this year, but at a minimum over the next year, I think we're going to have to look at health care, take a review of that and look at options, and I think we're going to have to come up with some sort of a plan, or have the city come up with some sort of a plan that we let citizens know that we're going to get this thing under control to where we get 70% or whatever.
I think a debt reduction plan is something that has come up quite a bit in this year's discussion, and I have a feeling that well, we can't take a hatchet to everything this year. I think that having a plan going forward so that this time next year, we're looking at, here's our 5-year debt reduction plan overall, and some of the things that we can't do this year with our health plan and so on and so forth. And I think I think it would be my goal is we bought ourselves some time this year, is the way I'm looking at it, just kind of holding the course, but not increasing our debt, and then next year is the year that we start taking the butcher knife to everything and cut.
You know, I see where you're coming from, and I would semi-respectfully disagree, because last year when the the budget came kind of last minute, we spent so much time then on the operating budget, we literally, in my humble opinion, glossed over the CIP. Last year I had asked for a 1-week delay to adequately look over the CIP. I was one of 6. When we came this year, it was kind of, well, we'll assess it this year. So now we're at the same place going, you know, so it kind of in some ways feels like we're kicking the can down the road. If we don't agree that we have to do something this year, I will very much reluctantly agree to approve the CIP budget as it is.
I think, make some specific suggestions. To do it, it's got to come with some specific suggestions, so.
Well, and what I'm saying, Mayor, is that have the discussion today. I am more than happy to take each and every day, Thursday, Friday, Monday, happy to work with City Manager Roloff as well as, our consultant who's in Mastino's place to come up with some viable suggestions. But I'm certainly not going to put in the time for us just to get to Tuesday and say we're going to keep doing the same thing.
Well, I think what I've recognized, and Mr. Roloff has brought this up before, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of the reasons I ran for council and was proud to run for council and proud of Oshkosh. Oshkosh has been on an aggressive infrastructure improvement plan over the last 5 years or so, and frankly, we had some pretty poor infrastructure in the 90s, and leading into this decade, we knew that there was going to be some debt associated with that and some long-term commitments associated with that. It has been aggressive. I have the impression it's going to slow down at some point relatively, and that's where we need to put a plan in place. But it is going to slow down. The debt associated with that is going to slow down, and there's going to be greater opportunities to pay off that debt service in larger and larger increments as time goes on. We've I think, made some great strides here in the last 5 years. I think the community has a lot to be proud of, and I absolutely 100% agree with you. I think what we maybe didn't adequately talk about is that I was very much a proponent for the city garage. I still am. I don't regret the decision. I think it's a very good decision. I just never anticipated that we would continue as heavily with some of the other projects. I thought it would be kind of a, maybe a 2-year, 3-year, where if that's a project we're going to do, we're going to focus on that and we're going to have to scale back. I never at any point in time thought that we would continue to spend as we have. And to your point, all excellent projects, all needed to be done, but there's only so much money and we can only put ourselves at so much risk. And we always have that. There is no municipality right now in Wisconsin that I think is immune from risk.
I understand the gentlelady's comments about the CIP last year, but the council did have an opportunity to address things, and I was one of 2 that wanted to raise the levy to address capital needs, and instead of going further into debt, of addressing those needs immediately, of using those for some of our capital improvements. And as I said, I was one of 2 people that supported that. So there was an opportunity last year to begin chipping away at this and not kick the can down the road. So I think that I think that the issue is well recognized, and it is going to be addressed. And we're not making the situation worse, but granted, we're also not making it any better. But at least that's where we are, is that we have stopped if you look at the percentages increased over the past several years. We've at least said, no, we're not going to increase the percentage this year. So that's a step forward.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe somebody who has the information in front of them, but haven't we basically, since our capital improvement plan this year, cut our streets roughly in half in terms of our street projects and some of our utility projects? I know there are some major projects going on over at the water utility, but from the stormwater side, we've cut back on the stormwater side, and so we've cut back considerably. And I think we've even cut from the preliminary one. Our preliminary capital improvement budget was something close to 17 to 18, and we're down to 12 now. So we've cut $6 million. So we've made the statement that we're not going to increase that debt, and we're going to start chipping away at it. And I think, having not been here for those discussions last year, I think we've sent a pretty clear message to the staff that the time has come. The aggression in catching up on these projects has got to slow down, and I think we've sent correct me if I'm wrong, City Manager,
I'm listening.
I'm pretty sure that we've sent a very clear message that the borrowing has to slow down, and we have to get the debt under control. I think, from my perspective, I think we've sent a pretty clear message, and I think that will be some of it's reflected this year, but I think we're going to see more of that next year, and I would expect to see more of that next year.
Yeah, I would probably characterize it that what we're doing now is we're easing up on the accelerator, because we weren't making a lot of progress for a number of years. Our stormwater utility had $10 million in the bank in 2008. I'm not proud of the fact that it's been drawn down a great deal, but I'm proud of what we've done with the money that we've done. And therein lies a challenge. We had years of maintenance, deferred maintenance that was really hurting us. And now we recognize that as much as we have certain needs in these areas, there is a fiscal element to that, and at some point we have to pull off the gas. We're not talking about hitting the brakes, it's more of the pulling off on the gas. And that's why I use that analogy to kind of describe it. The streets, as Councilor Clark pointed out, the street projects are down considerably in 2014, primarily because of the central garage. What we've done in the other utilities, because instead of doing comprehensive street projects, which comprehensive street projects mean you do water, you do sewer, you do storm, because we're not doing those, we're shifting a little bit of some of those capital projects into the water and sewer treatment plant and into bigger ponds. But even then, Mr. Potex recognized, when I first got here, Dave said we do one project a year, and I said double it. What was the plan? The plan was to get going, and we've gotten a good start on that, and I'm very proud of that. But Dave and I have also talked, we got to ease up. We may have to go back to the traditional one project a year, and that's what we're looking at doing. There's still 2 projects in 2014, mainly because we had so many projects in the queue, they're ready to get done. So we're doing some more of those projects, but we do have to ease up on the accelerator because of borrowing, because of all those things. I would point out a couple hopeful things, because in all of this we've had some good discussions. It's interesting, when Ed came on board, we agreed that we wanted to, we're getting some additional assistance with different things, including utility rates. The utility rate applications or analyses that are in front of you from Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer was Mr. Knope's consultant when he was here years ago. The last time I think Mr. Meyer was here, 2006? So he's had a 7-year hiatus, almost 8-year hiatus from the city, and he was quite surprised at the change in Oshkosh in that time. And he wasn't complimenting us on the streets, although he could have. That was what he was complimenting us on. He was saying, do you realize what's going on here? You're looking at a pretty heavy rate increase. But one of his observations, and I think it goes to Councilor Alzen Osby's point, is there a different way to fund capital projects? And it kind of also goes to Councilor Peck's point, putting more cash into these. Using the analogy, don't finance your car at 100%, maybe put a little down payment on it. And that's what Mr. Meyer said to us. He said, you need to put a little bit of cash into these projects. That will help you in several areas. Number one, you're not going to be spending as much on debt. Number two, your debt service will go down accordingly. But yet, 3, you're going to continue to have a similar amount of money go into your capital projects. But putting more cash into it rather than focusing on debt to do it is a much better way to do it. We had started that way when I got here in 2008. with stormwater projects. I instructed Dave, take care of the engineering cost with cash. We'll only borrow for the construction costs. And that's about 15% of the project when you put all the engineering, design, construction management, 12 to 15%. That worked while we had the cash. Then we started to borrow for those things. I think we need to revisit that. But that's going to require a one-time bump so that we can replenish it. We've already done that in the general fund. So going back, trying to fold this all together, we've got $1 million in capital equipment that 2 years ago we were not doing. That's a very good move. Should we put some more cash into down payments on capital projects, be it general funded or utility funded? I think that's what Mr. Meyer's observation was, and Ed and I had that discussion, and Peggy and I clearly had that discussion because when council approved this year's budget, the 2013 budget, you put $1 million plus into capital equipment that we should have been paying cash for all along. So those types of moves, I think, are parts of a strategy to lower debt and quit being so reliant on it for what really shouldn't be debt borrowing.
It's not a matter of, I appreciate your analogy about this laying off the accelerator, but as someone who's lived in this community for a long period of time, this community for too long was cheap. And I think what we are as a council right now is being frugal, and there's a big difference. Cheap gets you where we are now, where we have to, as Mr. Fitzgerald pointed out, there's too many Fitzes around here. That we had to make up a lot of things that weren't done that our citizens wanted, and now we're paying for it. But we can't all of a sudden get cheap, because while it'll make us look good in several years, there will be another council that will be looking at something like that. So we have an opportunity to really create a legacy for this community. So let's be frugal, not cheap.
Well, and I think,
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, last year we were in a unique position because you're absolutely correct with your comments that you made, that you were one of two. Although we knew that the school district was had a huge increase, as well as Fox Valley Tech, and how much can the citizens bear, and that was somewhat, I think, impacted some of our decisions. Not to say it's right or wrong, but what I'm looking at is sustainability. We can't go another 5 years, 10 years, how many years, and never give a pay raise. We have no idea where health care costs are going to go. Golf carts, squad cars, snow blowers, snow plows, none of them are getting cheaper. So I think what my point is I do agree. We have to continue because it's a quality of life. We want to make sure, we don't want to be cheap, we want to be frugal. But the bottom line is we're paying out millions in interest payments on the bonds that we're borrowing. So when you're talking about how do we fund $250,000 and sustain that for pay raises, or how do we address health care costs or those types of things, it's really about cash flow. And if somehow we can figure out ways to finance projects without necessarily borrowing and paying those interest costs, that's where we're looking at sustainability. So I think that's really, my point. It's not that I don't want to do any more streets. It's not that I don't want to do the Riverwalk or, contribute to, TIF districts for economic development. Couldn't be further from the truth. I agree with the comments that Mr. Fitzgerald made, all of them 100% correct. However, it is a balancing act, and we have to make sure that we're taking a look at it now. And I guess, with the operating budget, I think this year, I'm glad we started in July. Not that I have other things I'd rather do than spend 7 budget meetings with you gentlemen, but overall, I'm glad, that we did it. But I'm just saying, perhaps maybe CIP, maybe that's going to have to be something we take a look at. Because again, the CIP, there is no bad project. They're all worthy, they're all important, they're all impactful. But can we always have everything we want? I don't know.
One other comment, too. We've talked about our debt and expenses. Another area we have to look at is increasing revenues. Right. For example, we've heard, from Tim and so forth and Scott, that all these special events are stressing out the firefighters, the police, because the amount of the events, the amount of overtime some are being required, really do. I think we've got to start evaluating some of these special events. Are they good for the city? Are they good for the city financially? And if we're stressing on employees that have to work these events, is it worth it? Is the event really bringing money into the city? I think we have to evaluate developments. Cost-benefit analysis. How much staff time are we spending on some developments, and is there a payback? What are we charging these people? I think there are communities that have turned down developments because there was no payback for what the city had to invest for the development. And I'm not addressing either if it's residential through, say, apartments or commercial, retail, whatever. For example, Menominee Park with sawdust days, we don't charge them to use the park. Why not? I think we should look at these things. We approve all these special events. People do them to make money. I think we should charge for the use of some of these facilities that belong to the citizens of Oshkosh. Should we look at raising fees for launching boats, that type of thing? I think we've got to be frugal, but I think we have to count every nickel and dime, and we've got to raise revenues. We just can't do it through levies and property assessments. There are ways, I think, that we can start generating additional income for the city. And I think we've talked about on occasion, we really have to evaluate some of these special events. Are they giving the city the image that we really want? And again, it goes back to economic development. Is this the quality of life we want people to see Oshkosh offers? You and I have talked about what they do up in Bayfield. You look at Adair County. I mean, their events, they have them all year round to attract families. And a lot of our events don't attract families. They don't attract heads in beds. So I think we've got to be a little more judicious in how we approve some of these events, and I think we've got to start evaluating all of our fees.
Well, and I think most importantly is we cannot afford to be a bank
That's
for
right.
certain special events. We are not in the business of being able to finance special events.
Okay. Other questions on it? If not, what I'm going to suggest, and I'm open to other suggestions, is that if people have ideas of things that they're going to suggest as amendments next week, we can go around the room and throw those out, and you can make a list of them, because you guys may want to figure out what the cost of some of these amendments might be. At least that's where I picture us as going.
The man behind the laptop here, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Noakes, is poised to take numbers and talk about the impact of those so that council already has an idea before they enter next Tuesday to give you an idea of what some of these things are. We certainly have on pages 10 and 11 the primary cuts that were made, as well as the supplemental page that I gave you. Those give you an idea of the impact. So we can do that. We're prepared to bring you to Tuesday and make Tuesday as smooth as possible for you. And I think that's why you wanted to invest in one more work session to make Tuesday a little more efficient. So we're prepared to roll with any fiscal impact you have on any combination.
We could just go around the room if you want. If you want to start, Tom, if you're going to have some amendments to
I would start
possible amendments for next week.
I would start with the firefighters, adding the 5 positions. The next one would be the assistant planner in community development. This is I believe that based on survey results that we had earlier tonight, people are recognizing what we're doing in the neighborhoods, but that they believe that there's so much more that we can do. Additionally, a fair amount of the funding for this position can be generated through grants, through CDBG, I believe. Is Mr. Davis in the room?
Yes.
Can you jump in the hot seat, please?
I think Mr. Davis appropriately is going to probably throw the hot potato my way, but
all right.
You can start with that
but
one.
The other thing is that we're when we cut these positions, what we have to remember is that the work does not go away. And in this particular position, there's grants that can be written. Mr. Davis and his department have done a tremendous job writing grants that have greatly helped us leverage the development of the Riverwalk. Grants are getting fewer and far between, but those who write the grants are more likely to get the grants. And if you don't write the grant, you're not even going to be in line. And we have made great progress in our neighborhoods. We've got our neighborhood associations. We heard some comments last week. And again, getting back to some comments I made and Mr. Cummings earlier tonight, it's like we can't eat our seed corn. I don't think that this doesn't minimize any of the other positions that have been discussed as being cut, but this is one that I think is very important that we add back. Furthermore, this is a senior level position that is being cut, and we would be bringing it in at a lower rate with a new hire. So I would say that for the firefighters and then the assistant planner. Do you have anything to add, sir?
Yes, we've made great progress in getting neighborhoods interested and mobilized and doing some of the work that you've talked about, growing the pie, or at least not letting the pie deteriorate over time, because that has been a problem in Oshkosh. And I think we've been missing the boat on a lot of grants that are available for housing-type projects, housing revitalization, even entrepreneurialism in neighborhoods. So that's one way we want to address that, and we just don't have the staff time to pursue all the grants that we have. We've done very well with the Riverwalk and economic development types of activities and brownfields, but that's only scratching the surface, and we just don't have the staff to pursue all our housing funding opportunities, and I think we've missed the boat for the last many, many years.
Maybe by making Oshkosh a better place to live, maybe some of our employees who've chosen to live outside of Oshkosh may decide to return to Oshkosh.
That'd be a good way to do it. Couple things. One of the issues that Alan has reminded me of when I made this cut was the impact on the CDBG program, because we have to use our CDBG program for low and moderate income programs, and essentially I cut this position, and it has traditionally been funded with CDBG. I did it to save tax money. We still have to spend the CDBG money on low and moderate income, and if we don't, we don't get it. One of the things that Alan did point out, and this goes beyond budget, but if you've got the secondary options to reduce the deficit, there is it's about a quarter of the way down. It's the last one under community development under inspections, and this is a proposed fee, or it says add fees, include a late permit penalty fee. This is not very much unlike what Mr. Patek was talking about in Public Works in terms of that move-in, move-out fee, the penalties. Some of our penalties are on the relatively low side, and as Mr. Davis and I were discussing, there may be an opportunity to implement some of these fees, because some of it, just from a pure policy standpoint, we may need to do these types of penalty fees. Kind of go to what Mr. Cummings was talking about. It doesn't fund the whole $55,400, but it's $39,900. It gets you awfully close. And
that was on my list of things to talk about.
I want to give you credit then, but as we've talked about it, in terms of looking for ways to fund positions, there's value to considering this penalty fee, because we're also trying to change behaviors, and this will help change behaviors. And Alan, I can't even do justice to it. If you can maybe describe some of the fees that you're talking about, or penalties in this case.
The biggest penalty we're talking about is the typical is the double permit fee if you don't pull a permit for a building, electrical, plumbing project. Right now we charge a double permit fee, and based on the input from our Building Inspection Advisory Committee and staff, that double permit fee is not deterring people from doing the right, or it's not encouraging people to do the right thing like it's supposed to. And some communities have gone to triple permit fees, and that's what this actually the bulk of the money would be for the triple permit. I'm actually hoping that we never triple permit anybody, because we do want everybody to pull permits, and if they actually did pull all the permits, we'd probably realize more revenue just in our regular permitting requirements. But at this
Fewer
point,
return visits.
and correct. So that would be the bulk of the money, and that's our best estimate as to what that would generate based on the historical numbers for double permit fees. I'm hoping it actually would go down in numbers. The actual dollar amount actually might stay the same, since it would be a bigger dollar amount. The other one is something related to plumbing. That's related to which projects actually need a plumbing plan review, and some communities have lowered the threshold from 16 to 12 fixtures before you need a plumbing permit. Counterbalancing that, there's some things that we could actually not require a plumbing permit for if we're talking about replacing existing fixtures that are a low risk when it comes to replacing, say, a dishwasher or a garbage disposal or something of that nature. So that's the Building Inspection Advisory Committee's also suggested we take a look at that. So these are the numbers that we projected based on historical numbers as to how that could affect the overall revenue for the city.
I had that item highlighted, but I'll respectfully defer to the gentleman to my right.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Clark.
That fee structure was one that I had that I was going to discuss and propose was to use those fees. The other position that I was thinking of really discussing in depth was the PC hardware tech. Moore's Law has really been kicking in, which is the technology doubles at every X number of years, and that is accelerating. And I think it would be irresponsible of us to cut this position when, even in the next year, technology will be changing faster than we can think. And so this position does do a lot of the troubleshooting and the install. So as we continue to evolve with technology, I think it's an important position. And to help pay for that, I was going to propose a cut, twofold cut. It would be $50,000 from the equipment fund, which would directly translate into the CIP as the 2 newer lawnmowers for parks. So while there are 4 lawnmowers there, continue with the older ones. So it's kind of a trickle to help pay all the way along the way. So continue to save on the general fund side, and then pay for that directly through the CIP, so that the money equals out in the CIP, so we're not ending up borrowing for those and still maintaining it neutral to the CIP. The other one that I had was really the only other thing that I really was focusing on was the yard. In here it's listed as yard water permit fee, but I'm assuming you mean yard waste on the secondary list.
I corrected it on my sheet, so yes, you caught it.
The yard waste fee from $20,000 to $25,000 to add on the
not $1,000. $20 to $25 for the permit.
Right, but then that adds $24,000 to the revenue side. So raising revenue from user fees, that's not a general tax increase, while still focusing on balancing things. So those are my big ones, and I will continue to yield to the.
May I? That particular recycling, or for the yard waste fee, that's for residents, correct?
That is for residents.
What would we be doing a similar increase to non-residents?
Yes, I just summarized it. It would be roughly a 20% increase or 25% increase, wouldn't it, Dave, for non-residents if we were to do that? I got a spot here, Dave. Alan, no, don't even try to leave. And Chief, you warm up in the bullpen. I have a feeling you're going to be back.
We're currently at $100 for a non-resident.
Okay.
So we had gone from 80 to 100 when we switched from 15 to 20.
Okay, so with this, we would raise it then to
100 and
non-resident
a quarter.
to 100 and a quarter? Same percentage?
That's, that's what I was going to say, with the recycling fee, that really has no impact on the operating budget, though. If that's what Ed was
That's
saying.
true. That's true.
But
the same-
it's another, well, it doesn't affect the operating budget. I think it would be, I like the idea of user fees rather than general tax increases. Because that can still
Keep
help.
talking. Ed and I are.
Because I think for that particular fee, it would help with that section, so maybe.
The recycling budget now is proposed to have a fee.
Oh, so this would be covered under that fee? Okay, so this would be covered under the recycling fee?
Now, yeah, that isn't what Ed and I were
Okay.
talking about, though, because we were trying to say, okay, how can you make this work? You could make an argument that we do not charge a lot of overhead to some of these funds. We could charge some overhead to the recycling fund and use it to get more revenue. It would essentially help fund more of Public Works overhead. That's a possibility.
That's
if you wanted to do that. And you got to balance that against the backlash you're going to get whenever you increase a fee, which you know you do.
But either way, I'm, to echo the sentiments of the gentleman to my left, I'm committed to being fiscally responsible in adding those firefighters, and so every decision that I can make that can help increase our revenue side without raising taxes and keep our costs down is something that I would support.
Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. I would also support adding the 5 firemen back in. A couple of reasons. We began the session, this is what it's rated high by the citizens. The other thing, I think, again, it goes back to economic development. With the high rating we have, it's a marketing tool for the city to attract new business and industry. A lot of other cities in the state can't do it. I also, with Mr. Peck, assistant planner, I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few years with our neighborhoods. Associations are forming. There's been a lot of energy into this program. And again, having lived here a little bit longer than Tom has, I've seen what's happened to neighborhoods, and I think we have to stop it. And I think we are stopping it. And if we don't fulfill this position, we're just sliding backwards. The other area you talk about fees, the special events. Again, I think we have to determine a policy for charging these people more. I think if they're using public property, be it parks, we have to start charging them for the use of our parks, because their event really is driving out the citizens of Oshkosh, whose tax dollars support these parks. And I think in some cases, should we require these special events to hire their own security people? Put the onus totally on their back in some cases. And then, again, one last thing we talk about fees, too. We drive around the city primarily in the spring when the university lets out, and the terraces are full of furniture. And it sits there, and it sits there, and it sits there. I don't recall what we charge if the city has to pick that up, but
Whopping $35.
I'd make it a couple $100.
That's what the proposal
Right.
is effectively, right, Dave?
Right.
Awesome.
Is that the move in, move out fee?
That's the move in and move out fee with
Oh,
landfill
okay.
costs,
That's what,
right?
we're just
Okay.
calling move on. It's wider, it's broader than move in, move out, but
Right.
most people relate to that terminology.
Okay, thank you.
I won't do too much politicking tonight, but I mean, I certainly support reintroducing the firefighter positions. I've certainly heard from citizens.
One thing I don't want to get into is kind of voting on issues here
Yeah,
tonight.
yeah.
I think if that's going to be an
Let's
amendment,
get those,
the support in that
Yeah,
can
we'll
come
put those
later.
back
We
in.
really don't want to get into voting.
Yeah, I'd also like to see the community development position be put in. I also like to give some consideration if it's a position that we can put in, as of July 1st, kind of a half-time position for this year, with the understanding that it's going to be a continuing position going forward. Give some consideration to that. And then lastly, and I know it's a $55,000 difference, but want to give some consideration to a 2% increase across the board this year, pay increase for the non-represented staff. And my rationale behind that is really coupled with the pay performance plan that in total can be a 3 to 4% increase overall across the board. I think ideologically, when we instituted the pay for performance plan, it was hoped that would provide it would be a merit-based way to provide some pay increases as opposed to the step increases and across the board increases, which aren't really merit-based in any regard. And again, drawing some parallels to the private sector, we rely on merit-based increases to drive up pay for staff and our employees. I know I do that in my business, and I believe taxpayers expect the same as well. So right now we have this three-tiered system, this three-legged stool that we've talked about. I'm hoping that over time we can change the dynamic of how how much weight is placed on each of those three stools. But for right now, I wanted to bring that up for some consideration as well. And I think. I think it's a 54,000. It would be 2%, just a 54,000 savings.
You're in that ballpark, yeah, the low 50s, yeah.
Ms. Hollis-Nosby.
Okay. I would say probably the two main areas that I would like to see what the fiscal impact would be is obviously reinstating the 5 firefighter positions, as well as the IT PC hardware tech. Interestingly enough, that department is incredibly small. They're also incredibly modest, and it's actually been feedback that I've gotten from all of the other departments within the city as far as what it means to them, anywhere from administrative to police to fire to a number of areas. I had a discussion with the department head. I wasn't sure. Computers and technology is not necessarily my forte, per se, and I wasn't sure if it was something in which it was just that particular position was no longer needed because there was a technology change. Certainly not the case, and I don't know how necessarily, when we already have a director in that area that's probably available 24/7, how we can take a position out of such a small area that is so influential in keeping the rest of the departments running. So I would like to see the impact of reinstating that IT position.
Did you have another one? Oh, okay, those were two. You talked fire department first, okay. Mr. Herman.
Oh, thank you. I don't need to speak on behalf of the firefighters. I think everybody knows where I stand on that. So I won't go there till next week. IT, we can't go there. We got to keep that position. I want to see how that affects our budget. And I also think the neighborhood revitalization, the citizens have said that they're not happy with the work we've done in that area. We have an opportunity to have a position there, to work with our neighborhood associations, expand our neighborhood associations. There's a draft plan that's being in the works for that. We can't let that go down. We're just going backwards then, and with the work we've done in our neighborhoods. But I do have a couple questions I need answered in the CIP. And that is, where do we stand in this mobile command post? And where do we stand, and this is a fire department question, on the thermal imaging cameras, is that one camera replacing a bunch of cameras for $85,000?
That's replacing all of them.
And how many do we have currently?
And we have 6 right now.
What do we do with the old cameras? Are they passed down, or do we end up with, like, we get 6 new ones, now we have 12? I mean, obviously they're a very critical piece of equipment. I'm not a firefighter. My background's guns and ammo, but how important is that to replace them all at one time, or could we do half this year, half next year, that type of situation? Or are they to the point that they need repairing, things like that?
They're at the point where they need repairing and replacement parts, and the fact that they're a technology piece of equipment, and they're 14 years old, so those parts aren't there.
That's fine. We can leave that in there then.
One thing I'll just add, though, we're applying for a grant, or we're working on that, and we'll be asking for permission soon to do that. I put in for the worst-case scenario, hoping for the best, that we could get perhaps 80% of that covered through a federal grant, but we'll give that a shot. So there could be some savings.
All right, thank you.
Why would you need to ask us to apply for a grant?
Well, that's the way the rules are, because it includes an expenditure on
We can
our
save any of
part,
the cuts. That'd be
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, is it in regards to that? It was just something that spurred a question with me.
No, good. I guess the only other thing I would like to look at on the revenue side of things, and obviously we're losing our transportation director, but I would like, again, to have us look at our transit and paratransit fares when our new contract comes up. Because I know there were some fees when we had the discussion that haven't been adjusted since like 08, 09. We need to keep up with times. And then when we approved the routes last year, there was a lot of discussion about eliminating Route 10 or going to that faster route. And now I know that ridership is almost none on Route 10. So I don't know where the transit board is, if they're even looking at Route 10, Chris, do you know?
We didn't look at it at today's meeting.
Okay.
As Chris is coming up,
I guess just in general, because when we approved it, I thought we had a one-year review of that route and because the big discussion to keep it last year was we needed, one, the county was giving us a subsidy for that route, and two, was having transit to the county jail. And I know that even with the changes of the bus Route 4, we don't get to the county jail with that bus, right?
We do get to the county jail with Route 10.
No, with Route 10, but not Route 4.
But not Route 4, that's correct.
Okay, so that being said, I think as we get into that discussion with the transit board, we need to look at that Route 10 because it's losing money, obviously, I would think by now. And then how can we service some of those areas that the county feels is important as a subsidy to the city of Oshkosh? As fees or however we want to look at that?
I'll let Chris correct me because he needs to coach me a little bit before he leaves, and I'm going to miss him. But Chris was very much an advocate for Route 10 to really become a more express route and go via the university. And there was a groundswell of support at the university level, and there were members of the university community who live in Neenah who were willing to assist Go Transit with trying to get that going. Because that didn't happen on the route change, that groundswell effectively died. That group is still interested, I believe, and would try to do that. Route 10 has lost a lot of riders, mainly because Route 10 used to be really the only effective way to get to Valley Packaging. But now Route 4 really serves that need, and it should, because it's a local route. It's the North Side Loop is effectively what Route 4 is. And while some people have to transfer, there are a lot of people who live on the north side who work at Valley Packaging, where it's the greatest thing in the world. So depending on who you talk to, Route 10 or Route 4 is an inconvenience, or it's great. We think it expands service to a greater area, and it offers Valley Packaging virtually to the curb service, which wasn't able to do that before. Route 10, I don't think the concern over the route to the jail was ever founded, but the county used that as a sort of a bargaining chip. It's not that I want to say they're wrong. I would prefer that they look at it themselves and draw their own conclusions. Is their $30,000 being used properly? I believe the original intent of Route 10 was to connect Neenah and Oshkosh, connect Oshkosh with Valley Transit, and literally you could get to the Fox River Mall on 2 buses. That's pretty incredible. Nobody takes advantage of that, or at least very few do. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody because Route 10 is used. But if you take a look at the opportunity for Route 10 through the university, I would really hope that that with the university community's assistance, maybe we can make a pitch to the county to demonstrate that there are county residents in Neenah who want to ride the bus to Oshkosh. Chris, help correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're accurate with everything. We expected Route 10 ridership to drop because, as the city manager was saying, we lost a lot of the local ridership that had made it go. With Lakeside Packaging, with Logan Drive, both of those are now covered by Route 4. And the struggle that we've had for several years is figuring out what can we do to make Route 10 thrive, because it's always had a ridership problem. It was kind of tracking okay that we were treading water financially, but with the route change, that's changed things around. And as Mr. Roloff said, with the county saying that they want to see it go to the jail and have the local access in Jackson Street, that does tie our hands a little bit. Where the board is at with it at this point, we've been focusing a lot more on the city routes, addressing things at the hospitals, Route 4. We're looking to talk about Route 3 soon. Route 10 has a lot of challenges. The ones that have been talked about already, but also we have the issue of how do you connect it well time-wise with both our system and Valley Transit system. We were having problems with that before. What we did with the route changes didn't help that. So it's something that we need to be able to dig into a little bit more. It's underperforming at this point.
And Route 10 is one of our contracted routes, correct? I mean,
correct.
it's not a
Only
city bus
contracted route.
that is being used, so we're actually paying Colbison to to do that route.
Right,
Okay.
and we looked at one point about taking in-house, and contractor is still cheaper, so at least we're doing better financially for that reason.
Okay, that's it on that. So I guess I'd go back to, in our major equipment vehicles, it shows a $250,000 budgeted amount for the mobile command post, but from what I understand, if we look at the bottom page 34, under other, there's $144,000 that's targeted towards that mobile command post that was never.
The question never, we never had an opportunity to do that, and so I think
we need to get that out there, because I at first thought we were on the hook for $250 if we approved it, and apparently we're not. So.
See, I was in the same thing, so that might not require additional cuts if we do the cut. If we just cut 50 from the equipment fund, we may not need to cut as deep as I thought.
From what I understand, there's some.
The whole premise of this, and Chief Grohl did a very effective job of showing me the value that this could hold, but the value is really more in the community outreach, not in the law enforcement part of it. It really is the community outreach, which stretches beyond the police department. The police department's done an incredible job of reaching out to the community, and the other department heads see the value and the potential of having this mobile unit to be out there. Ideally, I would like to be used for no law enforcement activity, but for a lot of police outreach, which is not law enforcement, it's just community relations. Getting the libraries interested, planning's interested, parks is interested. There are so many departments that have the potential there. And when you start talking about it as a community outreach type of thing, we believe it has the potential for fundraising. So why was it $144,000? Because I could only find $106,000 when I was balancing it at the end. I said, Scott, you got $106. He said, okay, that's that's his incentive. There's the carrot for the police department to perhaps get out on a fundraising effort. We never talked about that, and I'm glad Deputy Mayor Herman brought it up, because the concern was that we're on the hook for $250. This is similar to what was going on over in Parks with what Ray was talking about with the Universal Playground. And fundraising is expected. So if we can't raise $144, we aren't spending $250. And that was.
But we show. How do we show this in our budget that it's only $106 when you got it out there as $250?
It's $250 with that offsetting $144, as you observed at the bottom of the page. And the understanding, just like it was with Parks, Ray hasn't gone out and done the Universal Playground because he hasn't achieved the fundraising effort that he's been acting on. In fact, I took it out of the budget, and you recall Ray saying, I'd like to shuffle some things around to keep that possibility going, because I think what was maybe about $20,000 had been raised so far, give or take. You're up to 50 now. He's keeping pushing it, but he's got to get the magic number, and the magic number is 100, because that was the commitment.
Okay, so that being said, on the grand total of the $44 million, is it as 106 in that 44 million?
The
or-
net cost is 106. If you take a look at the wide piece of paper that accompanies the capital improvement program, you'll see that on the expenditure, authorization would be for 250. But the understanding is that that won't happen unless the funds are raised. So you'll see that in the equipment area, you'll have to help me out, or in the equipment area, it says $5,450,000, but there's also donations of $144,000. Major equipment vehicles,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it says $1,215,000. $144,000 of the resources for that are donations or some other outside support. That's the idea.
So
Then my cuts don't need to happen.
So essentially, though, we've got in the CIP where we're borrowing for money that yet hasn't been matched in both those scenarios?
Correct. That's a very common thing. That means we don't spend it. Ray's had it in the budget for 2 years.
Right.
He doesn't raise 100, he doesn't spend 200. He has to have 100, and then we match it with 100.
We just don't borrow for it if we don't have the matching
We've
fund.
never borrowed for it,
See.
and we
So
won't
it's
borrow
it's in
for
the
it.
budget, but if we don't have the money, if we don't have the matched money, then we just don't borrow that money that year. So it just gets carried over as a line item that was never, we didn't borrow money that we didn't have.
In this case, finance and the police department will be in regular contact as we're getting close to our borrowing issue for next year. The question will be, how you doing on fundraising, Chief? Chief says, I've got the fundraising, I don't have the fundraising. If we don't have the fundraising, we don't borrow for it, and we'll be back next year talking about it again.
So it's a placeholder more than anything else.
Yeah, but if we get the 144, then we bring it to council, it'll be bid out, we say we're going to come with it, we've got the fundraising effort. I have a feeling that you'll hear the chief screaming from the mountaintops that we got the 144 before we even come to you with the bid award.
So what is the plan to raise the 144?
Well, we've been having a discussion of a public-private partnership, and we actually have the Oshkosh Area Community Foundation excited about taking this on potentially as a project. They are bringing it to their board on December 10th, and I'll be presenting there to make an argument. But we've got some, interest within the foundation.
Okay. I guess it goes back to what we've been talking about quite often lately is I think we need to do a better job of letting our citizens know really what our budget is and what it's all about and what it is all funding. Telling that story again. I know at the State of the City address you do a good job of doing that, but I think throughout the year, and I think this mobile command post outreach vehicle, as you said, Mr. Roloff, there's a lot of excitement from other departments. I think that's a vital piece to letting our citizens know what their tax dollars are going for. The mayor has brought it up several times. Fees are a nice thing, but they're still like they're not really a tax, but they're like a hidden tax in a sense because they're still costing our citizens money. Whether they pay $25 to get a yard waste permit or we increase the boat launch fees. Yes, they're all user fees, but they're still fees that citizens have to pay. And so we need to do a better job, I think, of explaining when we make these bigger expenditures and things of just what the money specifically is being used for and what it's going to go for and what is the benefit to our citizens. We talked a lot about economic development and the benefits of that as a community, and that's important. And so we need to continue to do that. And I think telling our story of what we're doing, where we're doing it, why we're doing it, and level expectation of our citizens to support these projects, support maybe a levy increase, which you already have built pretty much in, correct? Where you, under property taxes, increase the levy from $8.93 to $9.196. That's already built into this.
That's correct.
Okay, so they're already going to see an increase there.
Yes.
So,
and that's prior borrowing, and that's why if we can scale back and put some more cash into that, as council did last year, we can continue to do that.
okay, and so I got my questions answered. I on the mobile command post. I just really wanted to make sure all council members were on the same page. We're not on the hook for the full 250. It appears to be 106 with the idea that they're going to be trying to fundraise the difference so that.
Thank you. I did miss that, so thank you for pointing that out.
Well, I was actually going to bring it up the CIP workshop, and because the mayor caught me off guard having to run the meeting, it totally went out south of the border.
Blame it on me.
Yeah. Well, I got to blame it on somebody. Yeah. So those are the things that obviously what other council members have talked about. I can't say I won't say that. There'll be that information coming out to council on how it's going to affect our budget and how that's going to affect the levy. Is that correct?
With respect to
all the requests of positions back on.
Yeah.
How we are going to, where can we fund it, taking from one area to another area, or just exactly what options, I guess, we will have for Tuesday's council meeting.
Mr. Noakes and I have been making notes, and we'll compare in the morning, but identifying all the areas that the council has identified, whether one or more than one of you have mentioned it. There's only about 9 or 10 items that I have down. So that's going to be relatively easy for, I think what the mayor has typically done is, okay, there were 10 things that were brought up at the workshop. Boom, now you know what those 10 are. We'll summarize them for you. They'll be in the agenda packet, and then those will be the ones that you'll probably focus on the most. There's fair game to other things, and I think that's the mayor's been just always said that you've got fair game to change other things. But if we think we know what the 10 items we want to talk about, let's talk about those 10 and get through them. Then you can vote on each of them. Then you've got a whole package. So we'll be prepared for those 10 for you to go one way or the other on, and we'll take it from there. And we may have 11.
Just a request, I guess, because to Councilor Herman's point in regards to there, I interpreted as well as that we were on the hook for $250,000 for that particular. So I think not just picking on the chief or you, Mark, but I think when there's scenarios like that, some type of a footnote that indicates that, because it's listed as other. There's no way any 7 of us would have known what other meant except for probably the department head and you 2 individuals. So I would say moving forward, regardless of what department it is, some type of footnote, and do we have the funds escrowed or sitting somewhere? Do they need to be accumulated? Any information like that, because we've talked about transparency in the past. We can't read minds. We're not into this day to day, and that certainly would be helpful moving forward. To Councilor Clark's recommendation, I think it would only be fair, because we've talked about throughout all of the departments, when we have replacement costs, sometimes, it is starting to cost more to continue to repair than replace. I think we should at least give Parks Director Maurer the opportunity to talk about, that if that would be something feasible.
And that'd be
for his
one that,
department.
if we're not on the hook for the full 250, that's right where you can take that $50,000 and put those right back in. So I could actually now that I am clear on that, that's pretty clear that there doesn't have to be this direct correlation to this item on the CIP, so that I could leave that discretion to City Manager Roloff, and I could actually pull that one back, and we can leave those in there, because I did have a discussion with him about those maintenance costs prior to this meeting. So it's not out of the blue, but it would be, if we can put those lawnmowers back in, I would love that. That was just my way of here's financing. It was
You're proposing just us to write it off our list?
Write the lawnmowers off the list, but keep the $50,000 from the equipment fund as a possibility.
Okay, so.
Because we're not on the hook for that full 250, there's $100,000 there that we can work with, and I was in my mind painting a line. If I'm adding this, I have to cut this, and that was my thought experiment. So,
okay,
if we can leave those in, I would love to.
I'll follow up if necessary.
Okay, sounds good.
Through, Mr. Herman?
Yes.
Okay, I have 3. They relate primarily to my 2 biggest concerns, and that is the creep of personnel costs into the total budget as a percentage of the total budget, which leaves less money for other things in the budget. And the second is the debt situation, which I've been concerned about for some time. So the first will be is that depending on what the vote is on restoring 5, I would propose that the cut be less than 5, but so if that vote goes through to restore all 5, my suggestion and recommendation is going to be moot. The second one is
we're asking for them to put things out. What would your recommendation be?
I would recommend putting 2 more.
So half?
2 out of
Okay.
2 out of the 5.
Okay.
The second thing is that compensation. I'm concerned about the compensation package. I understand the individual pieces, and I think we have the pay for performance, but like Sean, as I actually thought what we were doing was talking about pay performance being an element of the pay increase. I mean, that's what we used to do at the university. It's a 3% pay increase, so much is across the board, so much is merit. Not we give everybody a pay increase and then we put a bonus on top of that, and then we put steps on top of that. That doesn't exist in other places. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm concerned about potentially the totality of that compensation package. So my proposal would be is that we take the 2.5%, which is $270,000. But what we do is we make pay performance 150 of that 1,000. So we don't add pay performance on the top. It's 270. But 150 of that is pay for performance, and the remainder is across the board, which is a little over 1%. So that the average increase becomes 2.5%. It's like the fire department. The average increase isn't 2.5% plus up to another 2% in terms of pay for performance plus up to another 2.5% in steps. I think that's too much in 1 year. I understand our employees haven't had it, but if you look around at what the state's doing at 1%, you look around what the county's doing, you look around. I think that total package of all those things together is too high. So I'm going to propose that the 150, this is similar to Sean's, it's a little different, but that we have a pay package where pay for performance and the across the board is part of a total number, and part of it's going to be pay for performance, and part of it's going to be across the board.
So if I'm just
so it's consistent with what, although it's a bigger cut than you were saying. So that would take 170 out of the across the board and just include the 170 as part of the 2.5, so that salary and some people, everybody would get some across the board, but they'd be getting, a lot of people would get pay for performance plus their steps. So I'm going to propose that. That would save $150,000 out of the operating budget. The last point is, and something else people have to think about that we haven't talked about as a group, but I think I'm going to have to think about between now and next week, is how much of an increase in the property tax are we willing to absorb after we put these together. So once we put a package together, I think we're going to have to ask, what does that do to the tax rate? Now, we know with the budget as it was presented, the budget as presented increased the tax levy by like 3.68% or something like that. Is that pretty
The
close?
levy 3.63.
3.63. But the tax rate, it's about 2.89.
Correct.
Because the assessments went up slightly. So as assessments go up, if the total levy goes up, it takes care of it. I'm prepared to go for a total tax rate increase, not levy increase, but tax rate increase, up to about 3.5%. I wouldn't want to go higher than that. Everybody's going to have to think about this. You may have other ideas, because that's going to be important, because that, with fees, I think, as Ms. Allison Osby said before, we're going to have to pay for some things over time. I mean, that's the reality, and the time has come. So you got to kind of decide. There's nothing magical, but that's what it is. So then my third suggestion is, if we can save money within that, and I hope we can save money within that 3.5% to take the difference between what we pass. If the tax rate comes out 2.5%, take the difference between those two, take that cash value, and apply that cash value as a cash fund to be used for capital equipment, which would help a little bit, which is another step. Last year you had talked about that, but you also talked about putting sort of a cash fund back into the reserves, which we did. I think that's a great concept. This is another way of dealing a little bit more with the debt. So you got to decide. So whatever that difference is. Now, if we restore everything people want to restore and we don't pay for it and we go over 3.5%, that won't exist as a recommendation. I mean, if we restore all the things we're talking about, our tax rate's going to be over 3.5%, quite frankly, unless there are more cuts proposed. And so that'll become moot. But if we can keep that tax rate average below 3.5%, whatever the difference is between what we do and the 3.5%, I propose go into a cash fund that you could pay out some engineering cost or whatever. Is that doable? Is a concept?
I think I understand what you're saying is 3.5% rate increase, what that would do to, what would that do to the rate? What would that do to the levy? And then how much can we fund with everything the council has just talked about?
How much can we fund? And if we can fund everything and have some money left over, that money would go into a fund to fund some capital, pay some cash for some capital aspects, and maybe save us a little bit on the capital budget.
You may recall that last year Ms. Stino had put together a package, and it essentially showed you different options and what different things would do to the tax rate and the tax levy. And we kind of did that with the deficit reduction decision packages. So that's what we'll provide you with each of those areas, so you have a good idea of what they are. And we can do a running total as well. And that's really and it sounds like you want to do a running total until we get to a 3.5% rate increase, and then say, okay, now at 3.5% rate increase, what fits under there, what doesn't fit under there?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any more or less we can do? So it's a revenue-based discussion point rather than an expenditure.
But it's combining the two together. So I just don't know where we're going to be after we vote on the various kinds of proposals that people have. So conceptually, that's what. So I think we need to deal with that. I think we need to deal with this increasing proportion of compensation. I think the compensation program as proposed is on the high side. And I think conceptually, I think we have to get in where pay for performance is pay for performance. You don't get all this across-the-board stuff, and then you get pay for performance in terms of bonus time. So it's kind of a merit. It's kind of you get increases for merit, not for existence.
I have a question off of that, Mr. Roa. Is department heads, are they eligible for pay for performance, or is it just the salaried employees?
No, all non-represented employees are eligible for pay for performance. They're all in the same. Everybody who's non-represented except the city manager is in the pay the pay system.
That's correct.
So every department head, every salaried employee
from the custodian up to the
all non-represented employees are in that group.
Okay. Because sometimes that gets a little bit confusing of whether it's our hourly employees or the pay for performance or all. As you just said, non-represented, so that clarifies a little bit better.
Everybody, regardless of their status.
Okay.
Hey, any other suggestions? I think this week, if you have some others, they could fill it in. You could send it into the city manager if you have some other ideas. Plus, next week, we can add to the list. But if you come with that list and what the impact is, I think that'll be it. You've heard what other people are kind of suggesting up to this point. So you can begin thinking about it and where we go.
Just clarification, last year's levy was 8.937, correct?
8.937.
Yes. So then a 3.5% increase to that would result in a levy of 9.2498, correct?
Correct. That's pretty close.
Okay, and even with restoring all of the cuts that were proposed on the sheet there, we were looking at a levy of 9.196.
Correct. Mr. Noakes just did some quick calculations, not to dissuade you or persuade you any one way, but just for example, with adding the heavy rescue unit back, the planner, and the IT positions, those are just three off the top, that would result in an increase in the rate itself of 4.375, a rate of 9.328. That just gives you a point of reference. So now that didn't include any other revenue changes that had been thrown out by council members, didn't include any expenditure reductions that were also kicked around by council members. That's just saying the three of them would do just that. Now, obviously, those are the three biggest chunks that you talked about.
Nothing else in there.
That's doing nothing else. If you only did those three,
7 people.
7 people would get you up to 9.328, but a 4.375. So that's that overshoots what the mayor's suggestion was.
But everybody may have their own idea. I mean, people may be
just
happy
giving you-
with that, may not be happy with
Just gives you food for thought as you
But
manipulate
some
tonight.
thought has to be in there, because that'll be the question that you'll be challenged with over time. by people.
I understand that, but will we possibly in the newsletter for Friday in our packet, will we be able to have that worksheet, in essence, where you've just said that, adding those 7 positions goes to 9.3 or whatever, but then that didn't include any revenue enhancements. If we can get the revenue enhancements in it so we get the net total. Then, because that's really what we're looking at.
We'll give you a listing of what the levy would be, what the rate would be. We'll also show you each of these individually as well as collectively, as well as some packages that we are kind of reading into. You're trying to take 7, opinions and boil it down to one. Now I know how hard it was for my mom to raise 7 kids and serve dinner that everybody likes, but that's part of our job, and we'll do that. So we'll give you as many of those combinations as possible, and you'll still have a shot at doing more if you choose to.
I like one from column A, one from column B, and
A little bit. It's a little bit like that, yeah.
But we do, by the time we walk out of there next week, we have to have a budget. Correct. Yeah, Ms. House.
Okay.
I guess what I would like to see, not necessarily for Tuesday, because we've got enough to tackle at that council meeting, but for sure the council meeting that is the first or the only one we have in December, I think we do need to talk about when it comes to special assessments, because right now we're on a 10 and 15-year payment plan, I believe. I think we need to start to look at and have something put together, the fiscal impact of reducing that, where maybe there's a 7 and a 10-year option. Only because 10 and 15 years, I mean, as I think the intent is good, I don't know that that has bode well for us financially or from a cash flow standpoint. I think I'm not saying it's a decision that we would for sure make, but I think we have to look at the fiscal impact of that.
And just one last comment I'd like to make is everyone understands that the taxing decisions we're making affect all 7 of us. We still get we still get a tax bill. Some of us also, some of us also own businesses in the community, so we fully understand what the impact of this is. It's not like we pass this and then we don't get that envelope in December. So we're in this with everyone else.
Excellent point.
Anything else for the good order? If so, I want to thank everybody for all the process we've gone through to this point in time. Next week will be decision time. So again, thanks to the staff too for all the work that they've done and coming forth, and the people that provided us input. For those that want to provide us more input, we got 6 more days. 6 more days to do it. So, well, thank you very much. Now what we need to do one more thing here. We need to have a motion to go into closed session, because we are going to have a closed session after this.
Compare notes in the morning.
Okay.
Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that following the adjournment of this meeting, the council convene in the closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C of the Wisconsin State Statutes to discuss the performance evaluation compensation regarding the city manager, employee over which the Common Council's jurisdiction and their exercises responsibility.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.